Okay. He's saying this was a red square 100 yards long that emerged from the ocean. From the ocean. Why did it come from the ocean, Tara? Like, what the hell is going on here? I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Friday. So typically on Freedom Friday, we cover other countries or our own government that are a threat to our freedom. But today we're going to cover a new potential threat, which is the threat of extraterrestrials or extra-dimensional beings. So before you hop off thinking we're crazy, I do want to say that we have a lot of evidence that came through a congressional hearing today. They're taking this very seriously. And so we're going to talk about it and give you all the fun highlights. So the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability held a hearing to discuss the implications on national security, public safety, and government transparency of the existence of extraterrestrials. And people are calling this the most shocking hearing that Congress has ever had, if you can believe that.
Wait, Stephanie, is there really something more shocking than all of the hearings this year that we've had that have provided like blatant in your face evidence of Biden being corrupt as fuck, and yet he still has not been impeached or imprisoned for his like ever-growing laundry list of criminal activities? Because that's still pretty shocking to me and something that I still can't wrap my head around.
I don't think anything is more shocking than our president committing treason, allegedly, but finding out that aliens are real, like for real, is pretty shocking. Now, there were like many huge revelations throughout this hearing. So we're going to go over like all the big main highlights. And the hearing included 3 expert witnesses, including David Grush, who was a former National Reconnaissance Officer with the Defense Department's Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Task Force. My God, that is quite the title. And then Ryan Graves, a former Navy pilot and the executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. And then David Fravor, a former commanding officer for the U.S. Navy. So what these men said under oath will confirm a lot of the rumors that have been floating around since I think like the 1930s. And Grush said under oath that the US government is in possession of UFOs and non-human bodies, aka aliens. So both Graves and Fravor said that there were active disinformation campaigns. So our government has been misleading the public for decades. Shocker.
Total shocker. But before we get into this, I have to say that, like, despite my frustration with the complete lack of accountability for all of the shit that's being revealed about how corrupt our government is, I am absolutely loving the fact that people are finally standing up for what's right. And all of these recent whistleblower cases have been coming out with information exposing government corruption, you know, from the Biden crime family to the FBI spying on Americans to the IRS and the DOJ interfering in the Hunter Biden case to like uncovering lies about COVID. And now it's whistleblowing about fucking aliens. And Stephanie, I bet all of these people across the country who've like seen UFOs or claimed to be abducted by aliens are feeling so vindicated right now because they can say, look, like this shit is indeed real, right? And so many people have been made to feel like they're crazy their whole lives. And yes, there are a lot of weird, like hillbilly people living out in the boonies who claim to have been abducted or that they saw UFOs. But there's also like plenty of credible professional people like commercial pilots and military pilots who've seen shit that's just not normal or that is not part of our military technology, like aircraft that can fly underwater and defy physics and then zoom back into the air. And there have been so many near misses with both military and commercial pilots almost colliding with unknown aircraft in the skies. And then there's all the quote, like normal people all over the world who send in their cell phone videos to shows like Paranormal caught on tape or caught on camera. And it showed, they have videos of like these unexplainable alien craft in the skies, and they record this shit for like 5 minutes while they're just chit-chatting and watching what's happening above. And I guarantee there are so many unreported sightings, especially by pilots and other professionals who are just too afraid to say anything, because they just don't want to be labeled as conspiracy theorists who believe in UFOs and the unexplained, because they're worried about losing their jobs. And by the way, I'm just going to keep referring to these things as UFOs, because I feel like we just keep making up words for shit that already has existing terminology. And like, what the fuck is unidentified anomalous phenomena as compared to unidentified aerial phenomena? I mean, they're all just UFOs in my mind. And just like pedophiles are pedophiles and not minor attracted persons. So I'm just going to call this shit what it is.
Yes, I will never call them minor attracted persons. Like that shit pisses me off. Speaking of words, I've got to say, okay, during the hearing, and you just said it too multiple times, they kept saying craft. Like, have you seen these craft? And I was like, why aren't they saying crafts? Like I always say aircrafts or spacecrafts. Is it just craft? Like, is that the plural?
Yeah.
That blew my mind. I was like, oh my whole life I have been saying it wrong, and I probably sound like a hillbilly. So anyhow, I think the reason though that they changed the name from UFO to UAP is actually like for a bigger reasoning behind the whole thing. So changing it from flying to aerial or whatever it is now is kind of important because these craft aren't being propelled and they seem to be like anti-gravity. So Fravor, one of the witnesses, actually said that it denied the laws of physics and has capabilities far beyond our material science we currently possess, which that had my mind spinning. I was like, oh my God, I want to know more. So anyhow, they're not flying objects like according to our definition of flying. And then they're not simply objects. They are phenomena or interdimensional, as Grush said, which makes me even more curious. I just want to know everything there is to know about these things.
All right, I guess that makes sense. And I suppose like I will get on board with that idea, although I am still not calling pedophiles minor attracted persons. And I am probably going to use the term UFO interchangeably with UAP in this podcast episode. So I'm just going to say straight up apologies to all of the alien technology elitists out there in our audience. But what I think is really exciting is that like our government has been covering this stuff up and denying that aliens exist for so long, or extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings or whatever they are. But now it's all being exposed. And of course, the Biden admin is totally blowing it off as usual. And the day before the hearing, KJP held a press conference, and she basically said there's no evidence that the government has proven the existence of alien life forms. And she said, quote, "My understanding is they have not discovered any verifiable information to sustain claims on extraterrestrials." So, right, just like there's no evidence or verifiable information on any of the other corrupt shit our government is doing, even though it's all being exposed on a daily basis. And frankly, I'm surprised she gave an answer. But do you remember we did a podcast a few months ago where this came up and she was so definitive in her answer about there not being aliens? And then she did the same thing.
That's surprising. Like you would think that she would be all over this because it takes off of the shit that's hitting the fan right now with the Biden family. So you would think she'd be like, oh yeah, let's talk about aliens. So that kind of threw me for a loop. But then again, she never has an answer for anything. So I wasn't that surprised.
No, and I'm frankly surprised she didn't just say she was going to refer this to the DOJ. But this congressional hearing has actually been a long time coming, because back in 2022, Congress created something called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, otherwise known as AARO or AARO. And this was created to track UFOs and other unexplainable phenomena. And I read an article in the Epic Times that said that this office has charted at least 171 reports of UAPs that appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. And also in 2022, Pentagon officials showed Congress 2 videos of UFOs, and I guess what was the first open congressional hearing about UFOs since 1966. And the first video was shot in 2021 by military personnel, and it was shot through the window of US Navy aircraft. And it showed like a white spherical object flying past the aircraft. And Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Ray, who's also a member of the UAP task force, said that there was no explanation for what the object was. And then the second video was shot by an SLR camera with night vision goggles, and it showed like a triangular shaped object moving in the sky while emitting light from it.
You know what really surprised me, because I've only ever seen that video of, like, they called it the Tic Tac, but
Yeah.
Graves in his testimony said that these objects have been detected where all Navy operations are being conducted across the world. So like he was basically saying it's not just a couple of sightings here and there, like it's a regular occurrence, and every naval base has experienced this. And Grush even went as far as to say that people have been harmed and injured as a result of these objects. And then he was asked if people were murdered, and he said that he'd have to be careful about responding to that in an open setting.
Wow. Well, since you mentioned like things going on all over the world, back in April of this year, the Pentagon stated that there were at least 650 possible cases of UFOs. And even though they like disregarded some of them as just being balloons or clutter natural phenomenon or something else that was like readily explainable, half of them were prioritized as being of quote anomalous interesting value, whatever that means. So the director of AARO is Sean Kirkpatrick, and he showed this video of a UAP in the Middle East last year, and it appeared to be like a round silvery object that was virtually impossible to identify. And then he brought up another clip of a high-speed UAP in South Asia also this past year, and I guess it zoomed past like an MQ-9 Reaper, which is some kind of unmanned aerial vehicle. But in keeping with the Biden administration's absolute denial of alien technology, Kirkpatrick made it very clear that their research shows what he referred to as, quote, no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics. Yet now we have this information being corroborated by all 3 of these whistleblowers that that's not the case. So you mentioned David Grush, the former DoD reconnaissance officer. He told the subcommittee that the U.S. government has conducted recovery operations on downed UAPs for years, and that they were keeping it a secret from Congress the whole time, even though there's compelling evidence in the form of photos, official documents, and classified testimony. And then Ryan Graves, the former F-18 pilot, he stated that he had witnessed advanced UAP on multiple in-flight sensor systems firsthand, and he said that they're a very clear national security and aviation safety problem. And then David Fravor, who was also an F-18 pilot and is the retired Navy commander, he talked about how he was on a training mission back in 2004 when he was dispatched to investigate an aerial phenomenon that had been appearing on the ship's radar for 2 weeks. As you mentioned earlier, he said it looked like a small white Tic Tac shaped object, and that it was like moving rapidly across the surface of the water, even though it had no rotors or any kind of visible means of propulsion. And then when they got within like half a mile of it, it rapidly accelerated, disappeared like right in front of the plane or the aircraft. And I guess there was a wingman who was like 8,000 feet above him. And that guy also lost sight of whatever this thing was. And then it re-entered the ship's radar 60 miles away in like less than a minute. So how do you explain that shit?
You can't. And like that's what's so fascinating. It truly defies the science that we know of. I mean, clearly this goes beyond that. And I'm going to play a clip now of Graves discussing another object. And to me, like this was the most shocking out of all of them. So listen to this.
Please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Certainly. In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans.
Okay. He's saying this was a red square 100 yards long that emerged from the ocean. From the ocean. Why did it come from the ocean, Tara? Like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I heard that and I listened to it multiple times. I kept rewinding because I'm like, did he really just say that a red square just popped out of the ocean? Like, it's so wild to me. And this is going to be a longer clip that I want to play, but I kind of made like a little compilation of a few clips of Grush because he was talking about some like jaw-dropping things as well that I think we need to pay attention to and follow up on. So I'm just going to play multiple clips together.
Craft.
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
What special access programs cover this information, and how is it possible that they have evaded oversight for so long?
I do know the names. Once again, I can't discuss that publicly and how they've evaded oversight. In a closed setting, I can tell you the specific tradecraft use.
All right. So who gets to decide this, in your opinion, in the past?
It's a group of career senior executive officials.
Okay. Are they government officials?
Both in and out.
Do what?
Both in and out of government. And that's about as far as I
got
can
you.
go there. Yeah.
All right. Well, that leads to my next question. Which private corporations are directly involved in this program?
I did provide to the committees in specific divisions, and I spent 11 and a half hours with both Intel committees. So.
Okay.
Who in the government, either what agency, sub-agency, what contractors, who should be called into the next hearing about UAPs, either in a public setting or even in a private setting?
I can give you a specific cooperative and hostile witness list of specific individuals that were in those.
And how soon can we get that list?
I'm happy to provide that to you after the hearing.
Super. Thank you.
You said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors.
A few questions for Mr. Favor. As an expert naval aviator, have you ever seen an object that looked and moved like the Tic Tac UAP?
No.
Did the Tic Tac UAP move in such a way that defied the laws of physics?
The way we understand them, yes.
Many dismiss UAP reports as classified weapons testing by our own government, but in your experience as a pilot, does our government typically test advanced weapon systems right next to multi-million-dollar jets without informing our pilots?
No, we have test ranges for that.
Are you aware of any individuals that are participating in reverse engineering programs for non-terrestrial craft?
Personally, yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you know any that would be willing to testify if there were protections for them?
Certainly closed door and assurances breaking their NDA, they're not going to get administratively punished for so. Yeah.
Graves and Fravor, in the event that your encounters have become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Would you be able to defend yourself? Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Okay, this would be such a fun hearing to sit in on, don't you think?
They said that the line to get into this hearing was longer than they have ever seen for a hearing.
Wow.
And I mean, there were people in the audience that I recognized that have been talking about aliens forever. A lot of people that work on these different sites and things like that. So, I mean, it's being taken very seriously, but, you know, he said a lot of shocking things. He is giving them names, not in this public hearing, but he's providing Congress in closed sessions companies that are non-government organizations that are involved in this, people that are involved in this. How is this guy still alive? Like, that was my big question. And like, why is he so like smiling and kind of almost joking around about it? Like, that made me a little like, what's going on here? So we'll talk about that, you know, as we go. But like, that just kind of, I thought was a little weird. Like, I would be afraid for my life if I was this guy. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, the way all this stuff is coming out, right? So back in mid-July, the New York Times reported that like Senators Chuck Schumer and Marco Rubio were going to create a commission and introduce new legislation that would be an amendment to the defense policy bill that would give this commission the authority to basically force government agencies to declassify undisclosed information about extraterrestrials and unidentified phenomena. And there was going to be like a 300-day deadline for agencies to declassify related information. And so again, that was just a couple weeks ago, right? And then this idea was taken a step further by Representative Tim Burchett from Tennessee, who fascinates me with all of his UFO stuff. And he, like, I've listened to interviews with him, and it's like, it's almost borderline like listening to a crazy person, but I love it. And he introduced even more restrictive measures requiring the Secretary of Defense to declassify any DoD documents or records on any publicly known UAPs within 180 days. And he did an interview on this podcast called Event Horizon back on July 2nd. And he was asked if he'd seen any compelling evidence about UFOs. And he said, quote, 100%, no question. We've been dealing with government cover-ups since at least 1947, in reference to the Roswell incident, and probably since about 1897 in what was the Aurora, Texas UFO crash. So obviously, living in Texas, I was a little fascinated and I wanted to hear more because I've never heard of this incident. So I looked it up. And apparently back on April 19th in 1897, a cigar-shaped UFO that was moving at a very high speed collided with a windmill on the property of Judge Proctor, and then it exploded. And when locals reached the crash site, they found the wreckage of an alien craft and a dead alien with unrecognizable hieroglyphics. So the next day, they buried the alien and they put a tombstone over its grave, and there was like a sketch of the UFO on the tombstone, and there was a photo of it. And then back in 1973, the body was allegedly dug up and stolen by the US government along with the tombstone. And apparently this whole incident was reported by the Dallas-Fort Worth newspapers at the time, and there are newspaper clippings you can see online. And it wasn't the first time something like this happened in Texas. And there were supposedly like hundreds of UFO sightings witnessed and documented in newspapers throughout the country during the Old West. And it started like shortly after the Civil War. So is this incident real? Like, I don't know, but I bet you could do research and find so many things like this from back in the day.
I have never heard of that before, but you know what I did find out today actually is that our government has over 1 billion pieces of classified documents dating back to World War II. 1 billion. Like, imagine how much we don't know that they have been hiding from the public with that amount of documents that they've just kept locked up, and who knows why, but there's a lot of shit we don't know.
Oh, yeah. And during this interview, Burchett also said that extraterrestrial beings have technology unlike anything that we know on Earth. And he stated, quote, if they can travel light years or at the speeds that we've seen, defy physics as we know it, fly underwater, but not show a heat trail, we are vastly out of our league. We can't handle it. We couldn't fight them off if we wanted to. That's why I don't think they're a threat to us, or they would already have been. Like, Stephanie, I know we say this all the time, but I feel like we are living in a fucking science fiction movie.
I know. It's like almost too hard to believe that it's true. And to be honest, when I first heard about the UAP hearing, like I figured, okay, this is going to be another attempt at this administration trying to cover up the Biden crimes. And I mean, just look at all the times we've talked about how every time shit hits the fan with Biden, they come up with some other distraction, whether it's like arresting Trump or talking about aliens. And, and that's kind of where my mind was going. I'm like, what better way to distract us than with aliens? And it made me think of a leaked CIA operation called Project Bluebeam that I think we talked about like briefly on an episode a long time ago, but it's basically where the government had plans to like fake an alien invasion as a way to become a one world government. And that's how they would get the people to go along with it, because they'd be so caught up in fear that they would just, not question it. And I mean, that's basically what they were trying to do during COVID. When you think about it, make everyone afraid and then do all this shit to take our freedoms away. So like, I am a bit skeptical. And according to this hearing, the government has known about aliens and have kept a lid on it for almost 100 years. And I mean, you're saying it maybe even longer than that. And so now it's all exposed, not because of like a technological discovery or a hacker, but because of some whistleblower who like has all of this information talking about Grush, but he himself has not actually admitted to seeing anything, at least not admitted in a public hearing. He's just heard about it from other people. And the government and all these like secret organizations that are doing these secret operations are really going to just let him run with it and publicly talk about it. And like in the very first interview that he did on TV a few weeks ago, he flat out said that before he came forward, he got approval from the Pentagon to talk about it. But why? Like, why would they give him approval? Like, why now? And if this whistleblower is exposing our government secrets and making them public, then like, how is that any different from what Edward Snowden did? Like, Snowden is still hiding in Russia because he'd be thrown in jail if he came back to the United States. So like, why is this guy able to like do all these interviews and hearings? And like just his demeanor in like those clips that I played, he's like almost like joking around about it. Like, oh, like I have all this information. And in my mind, like it's vastly different from the way the FBI whistleblowers acted, the way the IRS, like they were clearly like shaken to their core. And this guy's just like, I don't know, he's just acting different. And it makes me really skeptical. So like, I'm not saying that I don't believe any of it. I do believe that there are definitely these UFOs, UAPs, whatever you want to call them. And obviously there's something driving those. So yeah, like I believe absolutely that we're not alone in the world, in the universe. But I'm questioning, like, why is this all coming out now? And is there some nefarious motive underneath it all? Like, what do you think? Am I being too like conspiracy theory or what?
No, especially like you said, he got approval from the Pentagon to talk about it, but then you have the Biden administration denying that there's any
right.
So
that's why like I've been back and forth literally like 5 times today, because that's what I thought. I'm like, okay, if this was a distraction, then KJP would have like her talking points and they would be pushing this narrative. They wouldn't be hiding it. But
or the distraction is that it's so ridiculous. This notion of this even existing is so ridiculous that we're going to let people like talk about it and just make fools of themselves, Right. Then, like, so, but so many people believe, right? I was trying to look up recent statistics, and the closest I could find was there was like a Gallup poll that was done in 2019 that found that 68% of Americans believe not just in UFOs, but they believe that the US government knows more about UFOs than they're telling us. So that was in 2019. And I guess there was another poll that was conducted before then in 1996, where 71% of people thought the government knew more than they were telling us. So those are pretty consistent between those two timeframes. I'm curious to see what happens after all these hearings are done, and depending on how much attention all this gets, how many people are going to believe that the government is hiding this from us, especially in light of the fact that, like I said earlier, whistleblowers from all walks of government are coming out to talk about corrupt shit in the government that's being kept from us.
Well, yeah. And if they're doing reverse engineering on these craft, not crafts, craft, then that's got to be billions of dollars. Like,
yeah.
And they brought this up in the hearing. They're like, where are they getting this money from? And apparently this Grush guy is giving Congress all this stuff. So like, that's what I mean. Like, they're not just knowing what has happened in the past. And like, they've been able to cover this up for 100 years. And now like this guy is like able to talk about it. Like it's making me like just proceed with caution. Like if they flip this around to try to like next thing you know, and incite all this fear for the American public that we need to fear these aliens or whatever it is, then I think, yeah, like that's the nefarious motive, because when we're all in a state of fear, they can control us. Like that's how they, keep their power or whatever. So I'm just going to be very curious to see what happens.
Would that not be yet another perfect possible distraction before the 2024 election?
Exactly. And it makes me think too, like what you had said before I started going on this tangent, like if these things are that advanced, then they would have harmed us already if they were going to, so it's like that gives me sort of like a good feeling like, okay, I had heard someone a long time ago describe it as like, think about how we react to an ant. Do we care? Do we even notice that the ant is there? Like, do we really care what the ant is doing? No, like maybe if it crawls up our leg and starts messing with us or something. And that's probably like how these things would be with us. Like they're so advanced, both technologically and consciously, that I don't really think it would be a threat, but I can just see like if the narrative switches to that, then I'm going to run with my theory because I think there's something going on here. I'm just going to say that and we'll see what happens. But
okay, but I want to say this. I want to know how they're going to make this like play out in terms of what's happening with Hunter Biden and the whole plea deal. And then the plea deal being denied, and then basically saying like, are you going to turn on your dad or not?
Mm-hmm.
And either he's like, I'm totally on a tangent right now, but either he is going to end up dead
mm-hmm.
or there will be a quote alien invasion or something.
I thought the same thing. I thought we were like on the same wavelength because today I was thinking about like Hunter and like all these foreign business people that are talking about how stupid he is. And like we've heard like the messages, the WhatsApp messages of him threatening people. And I could see him like going to these different government officials and being like, if I get locked up, I'm exposing you. And then they like assassinate him or something. Yeah. But I mean, if what that informant said about Biden turns out to be true, which they're investigating it now, if it's true, that is treason. That is like the highest crime. So that's what I mean. It's like, oh, so now the aliens are going to come out, really? Like after 100 years, like now. So that's what I mean. Like, I just feel like there's something a little off with this. I'm glad they're investigating it, but like, I'm definitely being cautious in my opinion on it. But I mean, it is fun. Like, I feel like people have been talking about this for years. It's finally something you could talk about in public without people like calling you crazy. And I'm sure, there's going to be a lot more to come. I just hope that it isn't like used as a way to spread fear. But it is fun, and it's fun for Friday. I feel like we're always so like doom and gloom on Fridays. And so now everyone can have fun over the weekend telling their friends and family that another conspiracy theory has come out as being true. So we got to keep a tally on this stuff because it's like one after the other. So we'll keep everyone posted as this story unfolds. I'm sure it's going to get really interesting. And if you guys come on over to Patreon, we're going to be continuing the discussion and giving you all sorts of fun bonus episodes. We've got a couple posted now, and we're going to keep adding to them. So we hope to see you over there. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you back here on Monday. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.